What's up? Welcome back to A People's Historian, the show where we read about 30 minutes of history together. My name is Jason Kishineff, and we're reading Defining Moments in Black History by Dick Gregory. Remember, if you enjoy the episode, hit that like and subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you get notified each time I make a new video. Let's dig in. Frank Wills and the Watergate Scandal. Let me tell you how a black man who never finished high school brought down the most powerful person on the planet. In the fall of 1968, Richard M. Nixon was elected the 37th President of the United States. How he did it was he spent a lot of time on the campaign trail talking about law and order. Today, that's what they call a dog whistle. The way a dog can hear a dog whistle, the people can't. Some folks didn't pay attention when Nixon said law and order, but other folks heard him real good. And those were the ones Nixon was talking to. They knew what Nixon meant by law and order: keep black people in their place. When you hear Donald Trump say law and order, don't think he means anything different. Black folks got their revenge on Nixon, though. Now, Nixon was a Republican, and in 1968, he beat the Democrat Herbert Humphrey in one of the closest elections Americans had ever had. But 4 years later, in 1972, it was a different story. Nixon was running for re-election, and the Democrats put up George McGovern as their candidate. Maybe the Democrats wanted to lose that year. McGovern stood about as much a chance against Nixon as a cockroach against an elephant. All Nixon had to do to win was not get run over by a bus. But Nixon was insecure. That was his downfall. And his insecurity spread to the people around him. Some of those people were on what they called the Committee to Re-elect the President, or CREEP. That's funny. He says or CRP, but I've always learned it as CREEP. In 1972, one of them, G. Gordon Liddy, came up with the plan to break into the Democratic headquarters to photograph documents and plant bugs. That way they'd know what the Democrats were up to and could stop them from winning the election. The plan was illegal, but if you think that kept Liddy awake at night, think again. He told a couple of people about it. One of them was John Dean, who worked as a lawyer for Nixon. The other was John Mitchell, who was the U.S. Attorney General at the time. The Attorney General is the top law enforcement officer in the country. How do you like that? Mitchell didn't like the plan at first, but when a couple of details got changed, he said, "Go ahead." So Liddy pulled in a couple of other guys, E. Howard Hunt and James McCord, and they got 5 other dudes to break into the Democratic headquarters in the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. Now here's where the black folks' revenge comes in. A black man named Frank Wills was 24 years old at the time. He was born in Georgia and dropped out of high school in the 11th grade. He went north and found a new job, first in Michigan and then in D.C. Never made much money, just an ordinary fella. But that ordinary fella changed history. Although you don't learn about it in high school. In 1972, Wills was working as a security guard at the Watergate. The hotel had to have security guards. But nobody ever tried to break in, and the place seemed so safe that the building's security guards didn't carry guns. One day, Wills was making his rounds and he noticed a door with some tape over the bolt, put there so the door would close but not lock. Wills took the tape off and went to finish his rounds. A half hour later, he came back around to the same spot, and there was the tape again. Wills knew something fishy when he saw it, so he called the police. That's how the 5 dudes got arrested while they were trying to spy on the Democrats. When the FBI took a closer look into things, they found out that the 5 burglars had been paid by the CRP, or CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President. That made the FBI real curious. Now here's where Nixon blew it. The Watergate break-in wasn't his idea. All he had to do was say, "I ain't have nothing to do with it," and let the FBI look wherever they wanted. But he was scared of what else they might find. So that's when the cover-up started. Nixon told one of his aides, Bob Haldeman, to tell the CIA to block the FBI investigation. How do you like that? 2 spy organizations working against each other, but they're both working for the same country. Nixon's little plan didn't work, though, and as soon as a U.S. Senate committee was on his trail, it found out that Nixon secretly taped conversation in his office, and the Supreme Court ruled that Nixon had to turn over those tapes. It was all over then. On the tapes, Nixon could be heard talking about the cover-up. He knew he was going to get impeached. To avoid that, he resigned in 1974. His vice president, Spiro Agnew, had already resigned for other reasons, and the new vice president, Gerald Ford, gave Nixon a pardon. He didn't have to do any jail time. Just about everybody else involved went to jail, though. 40 people either went to prison over that Watergate mess or just missed being sent there. All because of one black man, Frank Wills. Nixon and his boys may have had the last laugh, though. Nixon got away clean, and John Dean, G. Gordon Liddy, E. Howard Hunt, H.R. Haldeman, every last one of those dirty dogs, plus a couple more I haven't mentioned, made serious money writing books about Watergate. What happened to Frank Wills, the only honest one in the bunch, and the only one who tried to do his job right? He was fired from his job and was living nearly destitute for a decade. That's how America really treats a true hero. Eventually, I hired him and paid him $2,500 a week. Later, he tried to get a job at Howard University in D.C., but they told him they were scared they'd lose federal funding if they hired him. I said to Wills one day, "Now I want to ask you something, man. When you woke up that morning, you were about to bring down the most powerful human being in the world. Did you feel anything? I mean, did you look up in the sky and see tens of thousands of horses? Did you hear trumpets blow?" I asked him that because I wanted to know. When you get a call like that, do you know something's about to happen, or do you not know, which means it could happen to any of us? Buffalo Soldiers. Now, Bob Marley, the Jamaican reggae artist, he was a brilliant musician and songwriter. Brilliant. The moment he opened his mouth and started singing, you'd know it was him, and people all over the world knew him and loved him. Still do. But let me tell you why I first said no to working with him. One day I got a message from Bob Marley's office. They wanted to give me $40,000 to be his opening act at Harvard Yard. I told the guy, tell him I don't want to work with him. Now what happened next was kind of interesting, and it showed me the beauty of Bob Marley's humanity. He got on a plane and flew to Massachusetts, where I was living at the time, then called me and came by my house. He said, Man, I just feel so bad. With all the admiration we have for you, I feel so bad that you refuse to work with me. He said it with no viciousness. None at all. I said, well, it's simple. It's because of the fact that you write a song that becomes the #1 best-selling hit, Buffalo Soldier, and you didn't know those black buffalo soldiers were sent west by the Pentagon to kill the buffalo to starve the Indians to death. He said, I didn't know that. After that, I agreed to open up for his concert, and we remained close until he died. Buffalo Soldiers were black soldiers the U.S. government organized in the 19th century right after slavery ended. You know the people they fought against half the time? American Indians. Now think about that. Europeans and white Americans enslaved blacks. Slavery started in America over 150 years before America was a country. And after America became independent, slavery went on for 89 more years. So altogether, slavery in America lasted almost 250 years. Then when it was finally over, what's the first thing the government does with those free blacks? Organizes them so they can fight against the other group the government has been abusing and slaughtering since the beginning. Indians. How do you like that? And the black soldiers went ahead and did it. The Indians called them Buffalo Soldiers because they had woolly hair like buffaloes. The blacks and the Indians were just like two chickens in a cockfight. What they should have done was team up and peck their real enemy to death instead of one another. But it wasn't the black soldiers' fault, not really, because look here. Black folks are always being compared to Jews. How come black folks can't get themselves together like Jews? I'll tell you why. When your baby is 6 years old, does he act like you act when you're 37? No. You see how simple it is? So we've had our so-called freedom for 150 years, and we're going to compare ourselves to people who have been liberated for 9,000 years. I say go back to the first 350 years after Jews were liberated. They acted the same way we do now because the slave mentality was still in their heads. It's the same with us now. That slave mentality is still in our heads. That's why the white man frees us from slavery and then tells us to go kill some Indians, and we almost kill ourselves trying to do it. Because we don't value ourselves. Look here. Black folks are the only people on the planet who call our women strong, but our cars beautiful. Something's wrong with that. A white man tells me that if my woman doesn't look like his, she can't be beautiful, and I believe it. I may see something in her, but I don't call it beautiful. I call it strong. We don't value ourselves, and it's because we've still got that slave crap in our heads. Now fast forward, all these cops out here shoot blacks in the head, but they don't mess with the black folks' cars. You ever had a black man come up to you and tell you, a white racist cop took out a nightstick and started smashing my car? No? Why? Because black folks tell cops what they can hurt and kill and what they better not touch because of what we value. If a cop hears you call your car beautiful and your woman strong, whom is he going to hurt and what is he going to leave alone? That's what's going on. But you all walk around in the middle of this mess every day and still don't see it. I didn't always see it either. I spend millions of dollars doing all kinds of research. That's why they can't stop me from saying anything I say, because they know they'll be in trouble if they do. And as far as the white man killing me, they've tried that. It doesn't work. I say, you guys come on. I'm in the phone book. Never had a bodyguard. See, there's a universal God that says to black people, death is better. I made you. But you let these crackers send you to war and you think you have to go instead of thinking death is better? Now think about the hundreds of thousands of blacks they tried to enslave who jumped ship. They don't tell you about that. Jump ship, man. Before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. Yeah. Black folk today say that and then go right back to work for white folks. And not just work for them, go out and kill for them. Black soldiers fighting Indians. Black soldiers going over to kill yellow people in Vietnam. Brown people in Afghanistan and Iraq. And why? It's because we don't know to value ourselves. We know how to make potato salad and do all kinds of other bullshit. We know how to dance, but we don't know there's something inside us. Look here, in the civil rights movement, we took on the mightiest military force that ever existed in the history of the planet, the U.S. government. Martin Luther King Jr., I was with him. Nobody ever heard him say anything trifling about white folks. He was just as meek and humble and brought them to their knees, man. But we don't talk about that because we don't value ourselves. We don't know what we can do even though we already seen it. For the record, Jews were not liberated 9,000 years. Bill Clinton. If I could talk to Bill Clinton, I would apologize to him on behalf of black folks. Hear me out now. Black folks tricked him. The first black president. They went in that big old black pot and said, "Here, white boy, you're black." And then they went back to in that black pot and said, "Here, Obama, you ain't black enough." What kind of foolish behavior is this? You don't hear the Ku Klux Klan telling Obama he's too white. I'd apologize to Bill Clinton because black folks tricked him. They've got him so confused he set up his office around black folks in Harlem. It only sped up gentrification, and now most of the blacks have been displaced. When he was young, one of my sons came to me crying. He said, "Daddy, my brothers and sisters are laughing at me." I said, "Why?" He said, "I built me a castle and I make like it's my house. Do you see anything wrong with that?" I said, "How old are you, boy?" He said, 8 years old. I said, "Ain't nothing wrong with that until you start using it as your address." So I'd tell Bill Clinton, there's nothing wrong with being black as long as you're only playing. But when you try to use it as your address... I've got some questions for Bill Clinton. Have you and your wife and daughter ever been standing on a street corner in New York and had a cab pass by you because you weren't the black president? Or because you were the black president? Has Chelsea ever been pulled over by a white police because her daddy's the black president? Mr. President, do you know what it feels like to be a black person? To be a congresswoman? Or a lieutenant governor or somebody with 12 doctorates and be driving down the street and hear the police siren? You start squeezing that steering wheel tight and they pass by you. And you thank God, damn thanking God, you didn't do anything wrong in the first place. When you know what that feels like, then you're black. Until then, that's what this is all about. Now look at some things Bill Clinton did and ask yourself if this sounds like somebody who ought to be called the first black president. Black folks should have seen it coming back in 1992, but we didn't. He ran for president that year. He wanted to prove he was tough on crime. Like I said before, anytime you hear the phrase tough on crime, substitute blacks for crime, and you get what's really going on. Before the New Hampshire primary, Clinton flew to Arkansas to oversee an execution because he was still the governor there. The black man they were executing was named Ricky Ray Rector. This is how pitiful Rector was. On the last day of his life, when they gave him his last meal, He asked if they could save his dessert for him until the next morning. Okay? That poor brother had the mind of a child, but that didn't stop them from killing him. And when it was over, Clinton said, "No one can say I'm soft on crime." But we hadn't seen anything yet. That fall, he was elected president, and his war on black folks really got started then. He scrapped aid to families with dependent children and replaced it with temporary assistance for needy families. The key word there is temporary, because suddenly there was a 5-year lifetime limit on welfare and food stamps, and if you were ever caught with so much as an ounce of weed, you wouldn't get a dime. You also wouldn't get into public housing if you were caught holding or selling drugs. So if you got locked up, you might as well have stayed locked up, because if you got out of prison and your only plan was to head home to the projects, you would be homeless. Not that there was much public housing left once Clinton got through. The money they had used to build projects, it went to building prisons instead. And which people do you think those prisons were for? There's your first black president. Al Sharpton, the Pope and White Supremacy. It's an interesting group to lump together. Let me show you something about how white supremacy works. Before I do, I've got to say a few things about Al Sharpton. I'm sure it's going to make sense when we read it, right? Did you know that he is probably the most powerful black person in America? He had a TV show on a white network, MSNBC, 5 days a week. Now it's just on Sundays, which meant that a black man was talking to millions of Americans every day. Every time there's a racial situation in New York City and it looks like there's going to be trouble, they go get Al to cool things down. Say what you want about that, brother. He is an American original. Where does somebody like him come from? He was born in Brooklyn in 1954. He preached a sermon when he was 4 years old. Was ordained when he was 10. That little boy went on tour with Mahalia Jackson. When he wasn't but 15 in 1969, Jesse Jackson named him youth director of Operation Breadbasket. And at 18, he was youth director of Shirley Chisholm's campaign. Wow. The man could draw attention like nobody you ever saw. He was an attention magnet, and he used that magnetism to keep the focus on what was happening to black people. If something happened to black folks in New York City, there was Al. In 1986, when 3 black men were assaulted in Howard Beach, Queens, and one of them got killed when he was chased into the path of a car, there was Al, leading a march through Howard Beach, making sure everybody was aware of the case until New York Governor Mario Cuomo appointed a special prosecutor. In 1989, when Yusuf Hawkins, 16 years old, got shot and killed in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, there was Al leading marches. In the 1990s, when Gavin Cato and Amadou Diallo were killed, there was Al. Some people didn't like the way Al did things, but he called attention to injustices that wouldn't have gotten as much notice otherwise. And in doing that, he became prominent nationally. He ran for the U.S. Senate from New York in 1992, and maybe he didn't win, but let me tell you, a lot of people voted for that dude, and now he's in front of millions of TV viewers. A lot of black folks have a problem with his hairstyle, but when something goes wrong, he's the first called. He's a powerful man, and he's a preacher. Now, wouldn't you think that if the Pope came through New York City, Al would be one of the people he'd see? Think again. When the Pope came to New York, the only black place he went to was Harlem, and Al wasn't invited. And all those crackers, including the mayor and all the rest that Al thought were friends, they went. David Dinkins, the first black mayor of New York, wasn't invited either. The Pope comes through in his Pope-mobile, hugging all those little white sick kid children. But when he went to Africa a month later, he didn't touch a black child. So who is this guy? I'll tell you who. The latest representative of white supremacy. I don't think we have the same Pope as they had in when he's the time he's talking about. At any rate, if you enjoyed the episode, hit the like and subscribe button. I want to thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.